Law Book #3 Tying Up Loose Ends. Act #1. The screen is at 99% completion, sir. A calm and measured voice sounds out from the background in the lab. Are there any errors in the cycle? The biological engineer then responds with no, Commander. This batch seems to be completing successfully at the moment. No response from the commander in return. The engineer then quietly enters data into their holopad and continues on with other tasks around the genetics lab. Hours go by with all in going about their daily activities until the end of day and all work ceases. Later that night, while all are asleep in their living quarters, does the screen glitch, shimmer and turn off for a moment to then reinitialize with a red warning and muted alarm that could only been heard and seen if you were in close proximity to it, with the words foreign contaminant introduced, cycle corrupted, biological life form mutation in progress. Cancel or continue briefly appear on the screen before suspiciously continuing without prompt. Moments later the screen goes blank and the normal cycle screen reinitializes at 99.9% completion. The morning comes and the lead genetic engineer wakes to check on the final product that they had been waiting months for, to see if this time they had finally succeeded or this was yet another failure again. With trepidation and anxiety, the blonde-haired, genetically perfect and proportionate engineer approaches the terminal, expecting the worst but hoping for the worst. The screen is in sleep mode as she approaches. With a tap on the screen, the results are ready for completion. With a second tap on the screen, the task says task at 100% completion with no recorded errors. She then clicks this report button to be sent to her holopad for analysis over breakfast in the mess hall. Later that morning the commander is in his operations office and sees the report and that the genetic program is a 100% success and calls for a senior project manager meeting soon after. After a general announcement over the comms of the secret Meson moon base rang out, all parties involved gathered in the main presentation theater for a general meeting and report of findings on the wall covering screen. All with holopads in hand, eagerly waiting on the commander to enter into the space and begin the meeting. This was a momentous day and was one to be held with trepidation and great excitement. Moments later the commander in his UN-assuming and UN-ranked pristine white uniform enters into the space with all of the biologists, genetic engineers and supporting members' eyes locked onto his grand entrance. He casually strolled down to the lectern that was already set up on the stage, with the main screen lit up with the research badge showing on a bright white background, illuminating an otherwise pitch-black theater space with only seating and side tables to take up residence in the darkness. He pulls out his holopad and with a tap of the screen projects the report onto the main screen for everyone to see. He then prepares himself and begins to speak. We are here today to meet our final challenge in creating the perfect being, Stage 3, and our final stage of the task given to us by our Mesa overlords. Yes, there has been a change of government and a change in how things are done. Although we are not constrained by these new governance or laws, we are independent to our own ends, and we will remain this way until the finalization of our mission here. We have successfully, after multi-generational developments, achieved phase #1 of our program. The subjugators of Teveria, with limited success, but a success all the same with our limited knowledge of the cross-species genetic procedures that were available to us from the Vandual specimens who we had access to back during the fight for Teveria and the Vandual. Some of you might or might not know there has been an external interested party that has offered us technology and knowledge that has successfully entered us into Stage 2. All of you sitting here today. We then commenced Stage #3 with limited success and failure rates to now. Today is the final realization of this endeavor and our final mission focus that will end our trials and tribulations to finally create the most advanced and superior beings in the universe. In this report we shall discuss the outcomes of our unrelenting dedication to this task and a final 100% mission success and completion rate now. The commander then goes on through the report and talks back and forth with the parties present in the theater for many hours. Once the meeting comes to a conclusion, all parties straggle out talking amongst themselves with great anticipation and excitement, leaving only the commander in the theater. Once the last of the stragglers leaves and the theater doors close, he presses a button on the lectern locking the theater doors. He then walks halfway on an aisle and moves into the seat in the middle of the row to then sit and hold his head down while looking at his holopad screen. He then taps the screen and on the main theater screen the image changes to a red frame with "For Your Eyes Only." Click to proceed. He then enters in the security clearance code and taps the holopad once again. The main screen lights the entire theater up with a soft red glow with the error report on screen. He spends the next few moments looking through the report to see what we already know. There was an error in the final completion phase with foreign contaminant introduced at 99.1% completion. Then some code he's never seen before in a language he's never seen before either. As he scrolls down, the code turns back into normal language again with error correcting algorithm successfully imported, all processes stabilized and task continuing to full completion, no further errors or anomalies detected, task will now complete. Then a knock on the main theater doors rings out in the large empty space. The commander then responds with "I'll be out in just a minute." A voice calls out from outside the theater, "Yes, Commander, we will be waiting for you at the genetics lab. We have something you need to see immediately, sir." With a calm but apprehensive tone in the commander's voice and a slight stutter, yes, I'll be there shortly, just wrapping up some archiving and notes for the report to be filed. At 10 minutes. The voice then makes an acknowledgement and leaves the commander to his task. Act #2. As the sun begins to glimmer its first rays of light for the day on Jalan, our new Kalarian friend Tularia is the first out the doors to gather ingredients for the morning. As she wanders, she stops to see both the Wrangler and Ghost passes out on the soft green grass out the front of the base after yet another heavy night, if drinking, with clearly visible bruising on both men's faces yet again. With what looks like the last of the crates now emptied of 100-year-old Scotch bottles strewn across the ground around them with the fire that has extinguished itself only hours earlier. She then smirked to herself and headed out into the lush lands around the base to gather her ingredients for breakfast for everyone, with a hover cart on her left-hand side to bring everything back on. Kalarian have exceptional smell and eyesight and can see food sources from multiple kilometers off. Although she had been experiments on extensively, she still managed to retain these natural abilities still. She was the perfect forager and farmer for our colony, and an unforeseen asset that no one could have foreseen, as such little was known about their species to begin with, other than folklore stories that at one stage in time held very real truths about them as a very dangerous foe in past. Though she was something different and something very unique, and sadly the last of her kind in the universe now. Soon the sun began to rise above the horizon, with her leaving sight of the base, leaving only the heavily bruised and sodden compatriots on the ground still in focus of the front of the base now. A small flying insect lands on the Wrangler's heavily swollen and bruised cheekbone, startling him to consciousness. Fists raised at the sky ready for a fight, he then lurches up to a sitting position to realize his current circumstances and environment. Then the headache, nausea and pain all set in at once. He reaches over to the campfire and grabs a now cooled large stick from the fire pit and prods Ghost with it to wake him from his slumber, to get both of them to their feet to hobble off to the infirmary for their almost daily treatment session and to clean up for breakfast and start their day. The Ghost, eyes closed while being prodded with an ash-covered fire pit stick, calls out, "Leave me, I'm dying here," in his thick Glaswegian Scottish accent. The Wrangler then says in an almost lurching response, "No, you muppet, you're just at home here in Jallan and it's time to get up, you lazy sack of shit." The ghost then opens his eyes and instantly sits up to then lurch over to his right and fall flat on his face again. Moments later he pushes himself to his feet and with Wrangler begins the slow and unsteady march to the front gates. The entire time groaning and hobbling their way to the infirmary. The usual onlookers point and shake their heads as they walk the walk of shame to the infirmary yet again. By this stage neither were too concerned with the pointing and head shaking anyway. This was just their morning routine at this point, although both needed to change their habits at some point. Clearly this wasn't starting today though. Several hours went by and Tularia returned with a hover cart, almost unable to support the load of ingredients she had managed to amass on her foraging trip earlier in the morning, with it bottoming out over small rocks and scraping as it went. The doors opened to have multiple persons of all species come to her, and the poor hover carts aid with unloading and moving the ingredients to the kitchen and cold storage for lunch and dinner later that day. Tularia had never seen such compassion and appreciation in her entire life until now, which broke her down to tears once again while still walking with the hover cart into the base. Flashfire saw this and immediately ran over to her for a warm and reassuring embrace and reassurance. Tularia then fell to her knees in his arms, uncontrollably sobbing with him holding her close once again. This would be a long journey for her now, and the fact she will without question outlove all of us is the thing that is weighing most heavily on her mind day to day now, and the true reason for her emotional state as well. The reality that she is also the very last of her species, that even she knows of, I'm sure weighs heavily on her conscience as well on a daily basis now as well. Supernova emerging from her quarters, hair down and dressed in civilian clothing only, shortly after Flashfire had also exited the same quarters to attend to Tularia, looked breathtakingly beautiful with the soft rays of the sun highlighting her long blonde hair in the morning light. Gazed upon this human man embracing this poor forgotten soul that we have now taken into our care gave her such a fulfilled sense of happiness she couldn't help but grin conscientiously at him and his empathy and decency. She was truly in love as he, and that decisions had been made behind closed doors to approach the secret moon base and declare their intentions to their already assigned spouses. This would be hard for both of them, but it would be much, much harder to ignore their shared destiny with each other now as well. Fate is real, and it's something that only comes around once in a lifetime. Both Nova and Flash were acutely aware of this with the lives they have both already lived and that of their parents before them who never had the opportunity to have these experiences in their lifetimes. This was their chance and they were not going to waste it. Rightly so, yes. Tularia slowly stopped sobbing and gained her composure again, thanked Flashfire and went on about her day. Flashfire stood up triumphant, chest pushed out, pleased with his good deed for the morning, and headed directly to his breathtaking partner out the front of their quarters. She then ran towards him, grabbed him and kissed him passionately in front of everyone. She then, after sucking face for a good 5 minutes, said, "Everyone, I love this man and I want everyone to know it now. No more secret engagements behind closed doors. We are officially together, and if anyone wants to argue with that, you'll have me to deal with directly. Understood?" Everyone in range of her voice and sight of that gross display of affection in public broke out into hysterical laughter and simply put a thumbs up in their direction. Like this was new news, right? This had been going on since day one at Jallan already. People aren't stupid. Later that morning everyone gathered in the mess hall for their breakfast to eat. Everyone in their groups at tables, including Anim at the same table as Flashfire, Supernova, Administrator, Cricket Killer, and both worse for wear Wranglers and Ghost and other squad members as well from Red Medical and Yellow squads at the main hall table. Though Amin was very quiet and not his jovial self today, Flashfire piped up and asked him if everything is okay, and Amin just nodded and went back to his meal. Flashfire caught up in Supernova's public announcement and rousing on by everyone at the table, making fun of their overtly public display of affection, making kissy noises and groaning noises to make light of the situation, drew their attention away from Amin and his solemn state for the meantime. Soon the rousing stopped and congratulations were unanimously awarded to them both. Then a surprise from the kitchen. Tularia brought out a special cake with written on top, "Congratulations lovebirds, it's about time." She then with a gummy smile walked back off into the kitchen. Everyone at the table looked at both of them and pulled out their combat knives to eagerly get a slice, with both Wrangler and Ghost hands outstretched to simply just grab a handful each instead. Supernova then went ahem. "Now everyone, this cake is huge and this will feed everyone in the mess hall. Everyone gets a piece, am I understood?" Combat knives holstered almost immediately, and Wrangler and Ghost sheepishly sit back down and hang their heads in embarrassment. Then music rings out over the comms system, something similar but not like Terran wedding music, but 11 battle wedding music instead. One of the 11 had jumped to his feet and cheekily ran over to the par and put on wedding music to celebrate the occasion without prompt. Tularia then sent out cakes to every table for everyone to enjoy. Though this cake was a special one with love and appreciation from Tularia herself. This was for the squad only, not everyone else. The rest of the cakes were of exceptional quality from local ingredients as well, but not made with love and appreciation and the highest quality ingredients available on Jalan. No, this cake was reserved for them alone. Everyone were given their slice and couldn't believe how goddamn good it tasted. This was something none of them had ever even closely tasted to anything in their lives before. It was euphoric, a foodgasm, one called out at the table. Not another voice was heard until they all finished their slices. With bellies full of great food and exceptional mind-altering tasting cake did Tularia and the kitchen staff get thanked as everyone headed out for their daily activities. "Flash honey, let's go for a morning walk. You haven't got anything planned for today, do you?" said Supernova. Flashfire responded, "It's funny you say that, as I was about to ask you the same thing. I found a beautiful waterfall a few clicks off and the walk will do us well after that amazing breakfast as well. Plus, at the end destination I have a surprise for you as well." Supernova blushed and sheepishly grinned. "Okay, well, let me get a picnic set up and we'll head off." Flashfire in a moment of fraudulent slip said, "I love you so much, Nova, I such a blessed man." Supernova then skipped off with a huge smile on her face back toward the mess hall to get a picnic organized, leaving Flashfire standing in awe of his situation, the soft sun lashing the back of his head and shoulders, soft sweet, fresh breeze whispering by, and the hustle and bustle of the base going on all around him. He thought to himself, this is heaven, there's no other explanation to it. Soon they met at the main gates to head off on their journey. In the meantime, Flashfire had gone to see Anim at his tinkering station to pick up the surprise from him. "This is my best work to date, I feel," said Anim. "I hope she likes it." Flashfire couldn't believe his eyes. This was perfect. He then thanked Anim and went to head on his way. Anim then stopped him and asked if they could talk later on in the evening about something he wanted to get off his chest finally about the past. Flashfire was more than happy to agree and then said, "Once we get back later on tonight after our outing, let's sit around the campfire, as I know that those two Muppets are out of scotch and won't be an incursion there tonight, and it will give us all the privacy we need away from prying ears and eyes as well." Will it be okay though if Nova comes along? Anim with an almost sarcastic smile said, well duh. Obviously I know better than to separate you two already, plus Nova would probably kill me if I even tried to drag you away from here after you give her that surprise today as well, right? Flashfire gave Armin a big bear hug and then ran off to the main gates to meet with Supernova as to not raise suspicion for obvious reasons. Both soon met at the main gates and with picnic basket in hand, they headed off to their destination. Several hours of walking and talking went by, both seeing beautiful sights and native animals along their path to then finally comes into sight the biggest waterfall Supernova had ever seen in her life. Birds flying around the spray bathing mid-flight and also getting a drink mid-air. The whitewash spray and the base of the waterfall creating a perfect persistent rainbow across the expanse of the glistening clear pool of water at its base and an already prepared clearing for them to set up their picnic at. Yes, Flashfire had been planning this for months now. Supernova then stood in awe and simply looked over to Flashfire and said, this is all the surprise I needed. I couldn't have imagined how beautiful this is in ever my wildest dreams. What a spectacular day we're having, I love you so much honey. Flashfire then sheepishly grinned and agreed in unison. They then set up their picnic and went for a skinny dip together. A time later they both came to the shore, put on some clothes as to not get sunburnt and have their picnic. As the hours went on, the heat of the day began to subside. They packed up their picnic and as they were about to head back to base, Flashfire said, Nova, just one more thing. Supernova then turned with query on her face. There was Flashfire on one knee with a small felt-covered box in his hand outstretched towards her as she turned around. Before she could even process what is happening in the moment, she broke into tears of joy and jumped him and began to kiss and hug and cry. The only thing she could manage to get out eventually was a resounding yes. Yes, yes, yes. Flashfire then, while holding her tight and kissing her back, managed to feel around for the small box on the ground and find it, to then with his other hand behind her open the box to then place it next to her in eye shot. Her face froze for a moment in an incomprehensible manner, then looked immediately back to Flashfire and with an almighty OMG. This is the most beautiful ring I've ever seen in my life. Who, how, when, what? Flashfire then smirked and said the most cliché thing ever, I know people that know people. Supernova simply brushed off the extremely poor attempt at humor and asked him to put it on her finger to make this real now. Flashfire immediately responded, not being able to get the ring out of the box quick enough to place it on her delicate slender wedding ring finger. They then gazed into each other's eyes and said almost simultaneously, this is real, right? They both then conscientiously nodded at each other. They embraced and kissed for a while longer to then see that sun was starting to head back towards the ground and that they had to get back before nightfall or they will send out a search party for them. They both gathered themselves, waved goodbye to the waterfall and headed for base. Several hours later, as the sun began to fall behind the horizon, the couple could see the main gates of their home base come into view. Armin was already setting up the campfire and had an early dinner being delivered to them there from what they could see. They both looked at each other and couldn't believe how fortunate they both were that even Anim had gone out of his way to end the perfect day even more perfectly than either of them could have imagined now. As they took their final steps towards the campfire, Anim jumped up eager to greet them and welcome them to their outdoor dining experience under the stars. The three of them then sat down with a cold alcoholic beverage with Supernova gushing over the day they had just experienced and flashing her ring towards Anim. He then acted accordingly and was in awe and appreciation of the exceptional quality of craftsmanship and congratulated them both wholeheartedly. Soon the food was delivered to them at the campfire to a makeshift table that Anim had spent most the day working on, with matching chairs for them all to sit on and enjoy their meals at. The couple were in ecstasy with the day they had just had and the exceptionally made fine food they were enjoying for their dinner, with good company in tow. Once the meals were finished, they all began idle conversation. Soon it turned on to all of their past histories and how both supernova and flash fire came to be, and then the conversation turned towards Anim. Flash fire then stopped mid-sentence and said to Anim, "How about you tell Nova all about how we met and what led you back to us now? It's a doozy from what I can recall, well, at least to a point, that is. The rest is all going to be new to me." Anim then hesitated for a moment and asked, are they sure they want to hear his story after the beautiful day they've just had? Both in unison said, "Please go ahead, you're part of our family now. I mean, we want to know your entire story finally, and that we're so happy to have you back with us after all these years now as well." Supernova then went to add, "Flashfire has only had positive things to say about you, now I want to know why in detail." Anim sat back, poured them another cold alcoholic beverage and said, "Okay, well, we might as well get comfortable around the campfire for this instead of sitting up here any longer." The three then moved the table and chairs out of the way and lit the fire. Soon the fire was going strong, with flames lipping towards the night sky and a radiant warmth that held the cool night at bay. Drinks in hand and comfortable in their seating positions, the story begins. Where to begin? Should we start where I began, being a pirate or a beggar on the streets at Lawville? Well, I could start saying that I was very young back then, stealing and doing crimes that could give me time in jail if I wasn't careful enough. I was only 15 at the time when I tried to steal from the local convenience store, and I almost got away with it until Flashfire saw what I was doing. I could see pity in his eyes though, and instead of getting me arrested, he walked over and said to me, "It's okay, kid, let's just line up in line to pay for what you have just purchased. Don't worry, I won't rat you out, just stay close and act like everything is normal, okay?" So, it was either I ran and most probably got arrested soon after, as there are security cameras literally everywhere in Lawville. So, I just went with the flow. It's not like I even had a choice at that stage either, I was busted, plain and simple. Flashfire and I then got to the front of the queue and paid for everything I had purchased, along with some things he already had in hand as well. Everything went off without a hitch and we exited the shop without any issues. In that moment, I'll be honest with you, Flashfire, I thought I was done for and you were still going to take me to the closest security officer and discard me like trash. Supernova then piped up and said, "You really didn't know Flashfire at all, it seems. He's not that guy's, and just one of the many reasons why I love him so much." Flashfire then went bright red and kissed her gently on the lips to then turn back to Anim for the rest of the story to continue. Anim then continued, "So, he led me off down the way and began to ask, 'Where are your parents? Why was I so disheveled and dirty? This is Lawville, not some dirty dusty backwater. How did you get here?' Trust me, the list of interrogation questions all became a blur before long, and I then simply blurted out, 'My parents are dead. The Vanduul killed them in the Hads sector at our scientific research station where the relics are. They were part of the Meson expeditionary team researching the origins of the GLYPHS and weird energy signatures that were still emanating from them millions and millions of cycles later. We were a civilian research team with no more than sidearms to protect us and packaged rehydration packs for food. Why did they attack us? Why?' Then I broke down into tears to this stranger who I now know as my best friend in the entire universe and who was just trying to help. All great in hindsight, right? So, Flashfire then put me up in our accommodations to get cleaned up and fed and UECs for brand new clothes to then meet with him at the spaceport in a few days once I've got my affairs in order and so forth. We set a time and a day and then, it happened. Supernova and Flashfire both asked, "What? What happened to you?" Flashfire then continued, "I also waited 3 more days in case you got the days wrong as well." Anim then with distress and embarrassment then began to explain how he made a stupid and immature decision to listen to someone who promised me the world to then only destroy it hours later. I was young and naive and I wanted revenge for my parents. He promised me he would help that happen and also make me richer than my wildest dreams could attend to in the process. It turns out he was also walking by the shop that day and overheard everything we had been talking about through his bionic earpiece, typical one-off pirate tech based on 11 tech and a guy that knew a thing or two about surveillance as well. He was exceptionally well dressed, much like yourself, and I just wanted revenge so badly that I fell straight into his trap. Hours later I'm forced into a 1SCU box with a few holes in the top, bread and water and drugged. Next thing you know, it's a year later he died to a rare illness and the usurps below him tried to argue who would take over the fleet. Within days they all began to plan each other's demise and then the killing of each other began. I fled and the remainder of us all broke off and separate ways. I ended up becoming a leader of my own ragtag group, wandering opportunists with my own fleet of rundown and barely operational fighters. We started targeting civilian convoys and taking people as hostage to be sold to the Bainu as sex slaves and divvying up the booty so we can get repairs done and food in our bellies across the non-contested and contested systems just to survive. I was sending my men one by one into fully frontal assaults to then only be down to a few of us left eventually, with no one wanting to take on enemies head on any longer. We weren't a fit fighting force any longer. Then the day came where my luck had finally run out. We had become so desperate that we took on a Bainu merchantman. Little did we know they had reinforcements inbound to intercept. We hair all blown to hell and only I had survived the aftermath. Frozen in space, the Bainu collected me and took me on board the merchantman and nursed me back to life. Though what happened to me next makes me wish I had been left there in the coldness of space to this day. I was taken to a slaver colony on one of the Bainu planets. I can't remember which one now, as I was shipped around the Bainu worlds for so many years as a sex slave to the point where I was no longer viable and was too old to be of any more use to them financially. So, they put me on the first cargo ship heading back to Terran space, and that's where Natalia and her crew found me. I was on board an Endeavour that they boarded and killed everyone on. I hid in the medical bay and acted like I was almost dead on the table. Natalia saw me first and told the men to leave this one, he's probably already dead anyway or close to it. I'll check on him on the way out once we're done here. Now get to work, you whore sons. Food and fuel and whatever isn't bolted down taken off the ship. Several hours went by and I just stayed there. I didn't know what to do other than just play dead. I know it's weak and lowly of me, but I didn't want to die, especially to other pirates. If they had known I was also a pirate in past, there would simply be no parley, only execution. So, I lay there and waited for the end to come. Eventually Natalia did come back in and said, "Look kid, I know you're not dead and I know you don't want to die. You have 2 choices right now. 1. You stay here and die as a result of the scuttling of this ship. 2. You come with me as my little pet. My last pet died on a spacewalk, very unfortunate da," said in her strong sensual Russian accent. So, I just slowly sat up and nodded slowly that I will leave with her. As we left the ship, she told me to lie in her bed on board her ship, and when we got back to the hangar for me to get cleaned up and present myself to her in the throne room immediately afterwards. So, I did what I was told and didn't mutter a word the entire time. After getting back to the asteroid base, I could see the history of the place on its walls, which made me feel as though she was just toying with me before she killed me still, and must have already realized that I'm an ex-pirate for sure already. You know, get me cleaned up for a public clean execution in front of her crew as a show of position and superiority. It's the pirate's code after all. Lead with strength and take no prisoners. There's no witnesses that way. I did as I was told and presented myself to her in the throne room, but with only her and myself in attendance. I thought to myself, this isn't right in the moment, and then before I could even utter a word, she saw the sex slave tattoo on my neck and my slave number in bone writing and said, "Oh, I see. Well, you're not even worth a single UEC, are you, my dear?" She then went on to ask how I ended up on the Endeavour in the first place. Then my story was explained to her to that point. I could see a glimmer of humanity in her eyes, and that I don't seriously think she's a bad person, just has to be for the life that's also been thrust upon her, much like my own, but to a far lesser extent. She took pity on me and made me what she called her little pet. I was asked to perform multiple tasks on a daily basis, her little tests, some more degrading than others, but I had to do them or I just didn't get to eat that day. This continued on for years until the day the subjugators recently gave me the opportunity to escape, although inadvertently. And here I now am, catching up with the only true friend I had ever had in the universe. Someone I will have an eternal gratitude towards and a lifetime of making up for the mistakes I've made up until now. Flashfire, I'm so sorry. I wish I had kept my end of the bargain back then. I know that now. Saying that I will never leave again. This is my home and all of you are my family for the rest of my days. And that's my story. Pathetic, I know, but it's mine to own all the same in the end. It's time to start anew and leave the past where it belongs. Anim then excused himself, sensing that it was his time to remove himself from the situation to let the lovebirds enjoy the rest of their night under the starry sky. This left Flashfire with some contemplation on times gone by where Anim was concerned as well. Though this was put to the back of his mind as on top of the most spectacular day of his and Supernova's lives, he also gained closure to a mystery that has been plaguing his memories for many years as well. There's a certain kind of serendipity to the way things have worked out. Not the best way possible, but the best possible outcome in the end, wouldn't you say? The next morning, Jinnah was knocking on Amin's quarters door, loudly yelling out, "Anim, wake up, sleepyhead. I've got someone you need to meet." Anim roused himself from his bed and opened the compression door to his quarters with Jinnah and her now healed and healthy mother standing there. With a huge smile, Jinnah introduced her mother to Anim and said, "Okay brother, it's time we get out family organized finally." Anim sat there in bewilderment for a moment, as he had also just woken up to Jinnah yelling excitedly and being called brother. He then responded in a croaky morning voice, "Good morning, Jinnah, and it's lovely to meet you, Jinnah's mother." Jinnah's mother then responded almost immediately in turn, "Don't be so formal, dear. Jinnah has told me everything about you and your history that you've already talked to her about. I have gone to the city council early this morning and applied for guardianship and adoption rights for you. I can happily say you are now my legal son, and if you have now objections, that is, we can begin our family here on Jalan together. We have a very spacious home that's been supplied to us, and it's simple, also has far too many rooms for us as well." So, after Jinnah had explained everything, I thought it would be fitting to bring you into our lives. We've all lost so many people and we all share horrifying experiences, including being marked for life as sex slaves, and we can share our terror and heal together moving forwards. What do you say, Anim? Anim sat there for a moment and reflected on what he had just told Flashfire and Supernova the night before. They were on their own journey together and he wasn't going to interfere with that. effectively going back to be orphaned all over again the next day to then this. A couple of moments of silence went by and then he looked up and looked them both in the eyes and said, "Thank you, Mother, and thank you, sister. This is truly a dream come true." He ran over and hugged them both tightly, not wanting to let go, nor did they with the great news they had just heard in return from him. Later that day Anim had moved all of his belongings over to his new forever home and settled in with his new and permanent family. Narrator, things just keep looking up, right? Right. Yeah, about that. Act #3. Now that all the parade and excitement of their official engagement to each other, both Flashfire and Supernova have made the decision to head to the secret moon base to end their marriages with their genetically perfect assigned partners. Several days had gone by and they have both worked up the courage to finally cut ties with the moon base once and for all. Both Flashfire and Supernova saddled up by their respective ships and took off together to the secret moon base in the Had sector, not knowing what was awaiting them when they got there. Over comms both chatted jovially, and although both were nervous to how this would eventuate and if they had to sign paperwork or not as well was also in discussion during their flight. Although both of them we decided without question at this point. Soon they both dropped out of quantum just outside of scanner range of the moon base. Both of them formed up on each other's wings and went in slow. As soon as they reached scanner range, something was amiss. Weird anomalies, unknown scans were showing up on both of their ships' scanners, and a mysterious sound, faint but not like anything they had heard before, over the comms. Both tried to hail for landing but to no response. Both of them became wary and turned on their ship's weapons systems and set shields to max as well. As they came into sight of the base on the dark side of the moon, all they could see venting into space was plumes of acrid black and grey smoke coming from each and every building in the base. They both landed on adjacent pads, with Flashfire being the first to land boots on the ground. He also asked for Supernova to keep powered up and ready for any kind of engagement. "Could this be the work of pirates?" Flashfire said. Supernova. Flashfire responded with, "No, this is something very different. Even the cloaking is down for the entire base." Flashfire then proceeded to slowly proceed with R in hand towards the main facility building. No one, nothing. Just amber lights flashing on all of the buildings. No comms, no bodies, nothing, he reported back to Supernova in still saddled in her cockpit with all systems on still. Flashfire then reached the main administration building and the door was ajar. He tried to use the hand scanner and the response he initially received was, "This facility is property of the Messer Empire. Any trespassers will be terminated on sight." Then a crackle and a crack. Welcome FFF Flashfire, with the audio breaking up consistently. Your EETER. The door then resets into the wall and opens with a jar and a hesitation to reveal a sight that was truly horrifying and gut-wrenching inside. Blood everywhere, body parts that look to have been showed on, and against this once pristine white backdrop was even more startling as well. Flashfire then quietly said to Supernova on comms, "Stay in your ship no matter what you do. Try to get a message back to base. This is a bloodbath here." Supernova didn't bother to ask questions and simply said "Acknowledged," encrypted message being sent immediately. Going comms dark. Flashfire then also replied with "Roger, over and out." He slowly began to move towards the theater as the doors were closed, hoping that there may have been survivors' help up in there and easy exit for getting them out safely to another building for now at least, before support arrives from Jalan. As he approached the doors, he heard an almost human-sounding voice over the base comms, but it wasn't quite human, nor was it like anything he had heard in his entire life. Supernova sent in text, "Did you hear that as well?" Flashfire then responded with a comms chirp with 3 chirps in succession as to say yes and hold position. As Flashfire approached the theater doors, he heard a distant bang and smash at the back of the facility. He then tried to open the doors, but a full security lockdown had them shut tight. He then moved throughout the facility and navigated his way to the security office to lift the lockdown. Once inside the security office, he had seen that most of the security monitors weren't operational aside from a few. He then saw something in the habitation wing streak past the monitor, and then the screen went blank shortly after. Almost like someone knew where he was as was covering their tracks while still in the building. He hesitated for a moment and then entered in the override codes and lifted the lockdown, and that's when all hell broke loose. Red flashing lights, over the comms. This is an emergency situation. All persons to your quarters for full site lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this not a drill. The message keeps repeating several times. Then the message changes to Subject Alpha 3. Subject Alpha 3 had breached containment. Stay in your quarters until this biological automation systems have neutralized the target. The message repeats several times, then nothing. Flashfire then looked at the base's most recent security footage, and what he saw was horrific and horrifying at the same time. There had been an experiment that had broken its restraints, and geez, it was ugly sucker. I went throughout the facility with noxious gas, obviously from the automated systems, without it even coughing once, all the time from what he could see through the smoke, ripping open doors like paper and attacking the people inside. But this wasn't just attacking them, it was eating them alive. What were they doing here? This was way outside of anything anyone could have imagined. Then tearing of metal, and the main hall security camera shows body pads flying, screaming, and splashes of blood flying across the main hall, which would explain the nightmare Flashfire had seen upon entry at this stage. It was assured that if anyone was still alive, even the slightest chance, they would be in the theater. Hopefully anyone in there had got to the emergency masks before the entire space filled up with that stuff. Flashfire then cautiously and very slowly made his way back to the theater doors once again, without even bothering to try to find any other survivors. With the amount of blood pooling throughout the facility, it was assured that there weren't any survivors left anywhere else in the complex at this point. This was now an investigation and survival mission. Flashfire soon approached the theater doors with blooded boots and footprints left behind on the once pristine white spotless floor. He entered in the override code and the doors opened. What he saw confirmed his greatest fears in that moment. As the doors opened, only a single soul was seated in the middle on the seating area halfway up the gallery. It was the base commander, who hadn't even bothered to get up and go for a mask, and what Flashfire saw on that screen was the final confirmation he needed now. The commander had left the hidden report details on the wall-sized screen, the room still glowing a faint red with all the evidence there on the screen still. This was the end, and he knew it, and left this up for one of us to eventually find, obviously. This was the final stage, stage 3 of us. Clearly it didn't go well, and there's something that is invincible in here with me, Flashfire thought in that moment. Meanwhile, a response from Jalan: all Red Squadron prepared for launch. Do you need any further assistance from Black and Yellow Squad? Supernova. Supernova then text messages Flashfire: what's your status? Flashfire then responds on comms: cancel the order. With that, Supernova with sadness in her voice then replies with Roger that, cancelling request. Flashfire then uploads the entire report to his Mobiglass and begins to exit the facility. Data uploaded, he began the extraction. He successfully exited the facility and began to search all of the other buildings to see if there was any hardware or personnel alive still. one after the other showed him the same thing. Empty building with all hardware including ships all scuttled like a self-destruct base sequence had already been activated to stop anyone or anything from leaving this facility or the moon at all. He then, after checking the last hangar, called through to Supernova on comms. This base is totaled, no survivors and a horrific sight on the main administration's building. I'm extracting now with some very important data for you to go through once we get home. All is lost here, it's time for us to leave. Have you seen anything on the scanners? Supernova responded, only a weird human-like sound, almost like they are beckoning me to come to the administration's building over comms. Can't you hear that too? Flashfire then responds with no comms on his end, it must be a ship comms system only signal. As Flashfire is in sight of Supernova in her fighter, a loud explosion erupts from the administration's building and materials fly across the runway. Then a blur of something moving at greater than human speed slowly gaining ground on Flashfire from behind. Supernova immediately on comms, inbound 100 meters and closing fast. Get to your ship, Flashfire, and do it now. Flashfire then picks up the pace to maximum sprint towards his ship, not even bothering to look behind him for even 1 second. Supernova launches her fighter and points her laser and Gatling just above Flashfire's head as he's running towards her. Laser fire and ammunition come spewing out of the mantis on her nose, and laser fire barely wisping over Flashfire's head with him at full sprint. Now Flashfire is only 20 meters out from his ship, but he still needs to saddle up and get power and engines on, let alone take off to join the engagement. This thing is now only 30 meters away from him and still closing fast. Supernova hits some extremely accurate shots, but they only seem to be slowing this thing down a little. This thing is taking hits from dual Bulldog repeaters at full power and a Mantis Gatling gun, and it's not dying. What the hell is this creature? Supernova thought while this thing is soaking up and looks to be almost instantly healing all the damage it's taking, all the while still slowly but surely gaining, although slower now, on Flashfire at full sprint. As Flashfire is almost at his ship, the creature is danger close. He saddles up and begins launch procedures. As his thrusters kick in, the creature leaps onto his windscreen and begins to try to get a firm hold of the rounded metallic surface. Flashfire then opens the windscreen and the creature falls back to the surface to then leap again to try to get back to him again. By this time Flashfire was, although barely high enough, managed to evade a second attack. Windscreen closed and then both fighters pull back to a safe distance and lay down dedicated fire on this thing, blowing off chunks of flesh to simply have then regenerate almost instantaneously again. Neither of them could leave, but they couldn't stay either. Whatever it was didn't need to breathe any kind of atmosphere and looked to be impervious to our weapons for the most part as well. Moments go by and the sound of beckoning started on the comms in both fighters again. It sounded mournful and needing of help, but this time there was no discerning between something needing help and an almost invincible killing machine hell-bent on killing and eating every living creature in the universe right in front of us. Then it simply stopped. The creature stood there and just looked at us. Not a word, just waiting. But waiting for what? Then a crackle over the comms. Distress signal intercepted. Unidentified facility, please give designation and purpose or we will fire and wipe you off the face of the universe. You have only 5 minutes to respond. If there is no response in this time, we will be sending an entire dreadnought volley of torpedoes to your location. Your do not show up on and star maps and your insignias are not either MESA or UEE designated. All ships in the areas you have been scanned and cleared to leave the engagement zone. We're sorry that civilians are caught up in this, please leave for your own safety. We will take this from here. You have 60 seconds to leave the engagement zone or you will also be targeted. Have a nice day, UEE Dreadnought over and out. With a chirp and crackle on the comms, the hail ends. Both Flash Fire and Supernova then backed up to the outside the designated engagement zone to see what happened next. The 5-minute timer countdown along with multiple open frequency hails to the moon base with no response ended. Both ships' radar systems then identified a massive energy surge. Moments later the Dreadnought sent a 150 torpedo volley at the moon base. The space around both Flash Fire and Supernova seemed to light up like day all of a sudden. As the torpedoes had all entered flight, the saddening mournful beckoning began once more over the ship comms. Both of them sat there and watched an entire small moon get vaporized off the face of the universe and that creature with it as well. Finally, they could head home to Jalan and get to the bottom of this once and for all now as well. Act #4. Edvar darling, did you get that little hack done for me today? Yes, my queen, I executed the code early this morning before anyone was awake. And you then added the little gift from my client as well, I assume? Yes, my queen. It was troublesome to bypass the security, but I managed to get the payload in just in time. I will say I was cutting it close even by my standards. But yes, it was successfully implemented. May I ask now what I was doing precisely? Then in the same breath, regardless, your client should be happy with the end results. This is why you are my second in command, darling. I can always trust you to get the job done. Duh. Let us celebrate with a nice raid on some unsuspecting civilian cargo runners today, then Natalia said. Edvar then, conscientious as usual, rallied the swine he called pirates up for a fun day out. While Edvar was busy, the main holoscreen in the throne room came to life with the same shadowy figure on the display. Well done, my child, my plan worked perfectly and it's all thanks to you mortals. Don't worry, my child, great awards await you at the end of your journey still. This was just something I had to do to tie up some loose ends is all. I have one more thing I need from you. You need to go into 11 space and find the remnants of an old wormhole for me. Also do your best to stay out of the 11's way. I'd hate for them to find out you're doing this for me for reasons you don't need explained to you, but will be in your best interests to not make yourself aware to them while you're there. I need some data on its current state and the possibility of it possibly reopening at any time, as this would be of great concern to all of your known universe and its inhabitants. It was located out the back of Cabari, where a feeble human expeditionary fleet tried to jump through an unstable wormhole to never return. The last transmission that was received was, there is another complete universe here and what looks to be a habitable world on scanners just ahead. Then the wormhole closed. Well, that's the official story. I need you to get there however you and your merry band of thieves can, whether it's stowing away on a 11 cargo vessel or whatever you need to do. This is your final and most important test, my child, and one that will seal your fate in the stars and make you the new and most powerful leader in the universe, with riches that are right now incomprehensible to your understanding. Do you want these riches, my child? Natalia, without hesitation, and her greed and thirst for ultimate power overwhelmed her better judgment, and she responded almost immediately with a yes. Then the shadowy figure sends her the last coordinates of the wormhole and some instructions on how to override 1000-bit encryption docking collars on 11 cargo ships. Then the screen fades and shuts down, ending the call. Soon Edvar was in the throne room again. My queen, we are all ready for today's fun and games. Just say the word and we'll head out immediately. Natalia then responds with different instructions. Edvar darling, change of plans. We have much bigger fish to fry and much more important work for the beautiful brain of yours as well now instead." Natalia went over the details of the task Edvar was now tasked with and to obtain the correct technology as discreetly as possible, no witnesses left, to make an encryption key breaker that can decode 1000-bit encryption. Edvar, taken back for a moment to think of how he could even crack 1000-bit encryption, but he knew someone that could point him in the right direction though. Edvar then smiled and nodded at Natalia while quickly blowing her a kiss to then slink off into the darkness of the base to head out to still have some fun and games with his crew for the day as to not raise any suspicions for his new agenda for the day. Meanwhile, back on Jalan, Supernova has been busy reading through the report that Flashfire had uploaded from the moon base prior to its destruction by UEE forces. This was something that the administrator needed to be made aware of, she thought to herself, and to keep this behind closed doors to not scare anyone, and to also receive instructions on how to proceed. Hours went by and the administrator and Supernova went over each line of the report in great detail to then end up with the final encrypted end report for the commander only. This was meant to be the final phase of their mission, called Phase 3, the final solution. This was intended to make a super intelligence that the universe has never seen before, advance regeneration biology and doesn't need to breath, is impervious to hot and cold, and is, in lack of a better term, an invincible super soldier breed using 80% Light 1 DNA, Vanduul DNA, Terran DNA and 11N DNA. This took the best of all the collective genes from these species and combined them into one super being. And for what purpose? What kind of threat did the Mesa expect to face? This just opened up a brand new conversation and deliberation between both the administrator and Supernova that led down a very dark path of discussion for days to come. The administrator then decided that this theory crafting was getting them even further off the task at hand, and that he himself would need to travel to Backwater City to confront Braca himself. The next day the administrator took administrative leave for personal reasons, well on the books, so that no one would pry into his reasons for leaving Jalan all of a sudden. He then prepared for the journey ahead. He grabbed a hollow pad with a copy of the report and some other equipment with him to his ship, something that Armin had made him might just come in handy finally. He then bid farewell and that he was going for a short break to the Terran system for a couple of weeks to look into his family history and see planet Earth for the first time in his life. Everyone wished him well, and that if he needs any of them to come and help, they are only a call away. He then thanked everyone and swiftly headed for his ship as to not be stopped and questioned by anyone else. Supernova also had him attach a tracking beacon to his ship and himself just in case something went wrong on this secret mission. Especially if everyone thought he was heading for the Sol system, no one would think to look for him where's he's actually going, and if something happens to him, Supernova and Flashfire, let alone the entire squad, would never be able to trust her ever again. Soon the administrator saddled up and commenced life off. As he rose above the land, he looked at the stunning scenery to take a mental snapshot of what he was protecting, and to also, if the worst happens, see his real home one last time in his memory. Hours went by while in Quantum as he prepared his speech for Braca and what questions he'd ask in which order to not raise suspicion with him immediately, and to obtain as much information as possible from him before he, if he is behind this in any way, catch on to what the administrator knew already. This was potentially a suicide mission and he knew the risks, but had a duty to his people and the universe itself now as well. Soon he began the approach to Backwater City and began his descent to the surface. After a quick scan, it seemed that things were a little too quiet on the surface, and that the usual landing pads they had landed at before were more quiet than usual as well. No street urchins or wares peddlers near the pads ready to beg or sell their low-tier wares for a UEC or two. The administrator was already on edge, and this made him even more conscious of the situation. He went in for landing but did a fly around first to see the reason for the lack of activity around the city. The industrial area was still busy with gunfights and bad deals going on. The trade district seemed to have a lot of bodies moving around still, but the western side of the city where the administrator was to land was eerily quiet and devoid of life for some reason. Maybe the security forces had done a clean-up of the area after the brothel was forcibly shut down by us. But that wouldn't explain the lack of beggars and peddlers, would it? The administrator then went into land and not a problem in sight. He left his seat and landed boots on the ground. There was an eerie silence and lack of the usual rotting smells of garbage and detritus as well. It's like all biological matter had been either cleaned up or vaporized, potentially by a clean-up crew. But this was Backwater City. This kind of sanitation service doesn't really exist here, he thought to himself. He then, weapon in hand, began the slow walk to the Backwater Inn, passing by the now boarded-up brothel along the way, blood stains still littering the street near the front door used to be, now just some iron sheeting terrabolted into the facade where the door used to be, ensuring no squatters of other types could gain access. As the administrator slowly walked further, he saw the sign half hanging off its holder for the Dark Horse Inn and thought to himself, this isn't something that Bracker would allow at the best of times. His suspicions grew to a fever pitch now, and sweat began to bead down his forehead, down his cheek, in his helmet as he took the next trepidatious steps towards the Dark Horse Inn. He then hears a scurry and some sheet metal falling to the ground. He swung 180 degrees to see a domesticated copium dog chasing a small rodent of some kind into the dusty streets behind. He then took a moment to center himself and turn back around towards the Dark Horse Inn again and continue his forward march. Moments later the door of the bar was in sight, but no music. No people talking. No clanging of glasses. No lights. The administrator then tactically rushed in the door, weapon butted into his shoulder, ready for a firefight. Nothing. No one, just street dust and an abandoned bar. Nothing on the shelves. The seat looked like they hadn't been sat on for years and were in such a state of decay that if you tried to sit one, you'd be seriously injured in the fall, especially the bar stools. The administrator then walked out and checked that he was in the right place and referred to his mobiglass to make sure of his current position. He was where he was meant to be, so what the hell is going on, he thought. Where was Bracker? Where was the Dark Horse Inn? Where is everyone? The administrator being here and no one but Supernova knowing he's here is making things a lot more complicated at this point as well. He thought to himself he'd go for a walk around the more inhabited areas and do some asking around to see what was going on with the western side of the city. The feedback he got was disconcerting, to say it nicely. As soon as those do-gooders shut down the brothel, good riddance, one of them said. It was taking business away from the trades district anyway. There was a massive energy surge in the area. Security forces couldn't explain it, but it vaporized everything biological in the area, it seems, and that's a good thing. That place was a garbage pit just waiting to catch on fire anyway. But the bar, that was the most disconcerting thing of all. No one seems to remember there being a bartender running the place, well, not for at least 20 years in their living memory at least. But there was a lot of trade shortly before the energy event, so who knows, it's not a place that really any of the trades or industrial district people went, as the only attraction out there was the brothel, and you had to have UECs to space, if you get my meaning, to even go there anyway. So yes, there could have been someone running the place, but not to the knowledge of these folks at least. This just raised further questions in the administrator's mind, and clearly Bracker had lost his temper and left soon after he did. That would also explain the decayed bar now too. His energy must have degraded the wood in the bar and chairs, and anything that was rotting and or alive was just vaporized in a fit of rage. So why was he so angry, especially to a point where he lost control and vaporized everyone and thing around him? The plot thickens, he thought to himself, and where the hell has Braca gone now? The administrator then called through to Supernova and filled her in on the current predicament. She was in shock and didn't for the first time ever have an answer for him. She then referenced all travel records from Backwater City of all incoming and outgoing craft and materials over the past couple of months since they were there last, and the only suspicious entry was Natalia's ship code that had any relevance now. The administrator responded, Natalia. What was she doing here? Supernova then performed a path tracing procedure and found that Natalia's step led straight to the Dark Horse Inn and then back to her ship at the very same time as our last visit. The administrator then leapt into his ship and raced for Jalan. He asked Supernova to do a current positional search for Natalia's last whereabouts and to send the coordinates to his Mobiglass as soon as possible. Supernova then responded shortly after with the coordinates sent to the Had's sector, but the trail goes cold as soon as she enters the asteroid belt. This at least was a place to start, he thought. He then thanked Supernova and asked her to do some more research on Natalia's background and why and how in any way she might be involved with Braca at any point prior to now. The administrator then headed for the Had's sector in search of more evidence and to try to find Natalia and hold a parley to discuss how and why she is involved with Braca aside from the obvious reasons pirates do anything already. The risk was worth the journey, he thought. After many stops at less than desirable truck stops and space stations later, the administrator finally, after several cycles, reached the Had's sector and followed the coordinated provided to him by Supernova to the asteroid belt where the trail went cold. He then slew around using pulse scans to look for anything out of the usual. Some ship debris and other space junk, including drink bottles and food wrappers, but nothing of any significance. He was about to give up the search when he saw an energy signature light up on his Hornet Ghost's radar. It was emanating from an asteroid only 10 clicks away, so he put his engines to full and engaged his afterburners immediately. As he drew closer, he detected multiple fighters and some medium cargo ships as well. He then turned off all systems and began to drift as to not show up on any of their radar. The ships, all with pirate markings, then jumped to quantum together, leaving only the faint energy signature from the massive unnaturally large asteroid still. He then turned systems back on and began to scan the asteroid. He then spotted a glint of metal and right in front of him, then nothing again. He ran some more scans and did some more reconnaissance around this oddly large asteroid. Then out of desperation hailed the asteroid, and with hope and authority in his voice he said, "Inheritance of the asteroid, I know you're in the... I just saw your ships leave from here. I want to parley. I am a single medium fighter with no intention to fight. I just want to ask questions only." The comms hissed with white noise for a minute or so, then a chirp and crackle. In a strong sensual Russian accent over the comms, "Hello darling, I've been waiting for you to poke your nose around here. You certainly took your time, didn't you? Now where is my pet?" The administrator then in a split second realized he'd found who he was looking for. Natalia then said, "I'll open the hangar doors, but no funny business, okay? You want to talk, let's talk, duh. It's okay, it'll only be you and me darling, no surprises here either. Yes, we may be on opposite sides, but I think we both have enough respect for each other as leaders to ensure this parley won't go poorly this time, duh." The administrator then responded in turn, "This is something far bigger than either of us and anyone we know. I just want information, that's all, Do I have permission to land? Natalia then lowered the cloaking system and opened the hangar doors. The administrator then went in to land. The hulking doors creaked and groaned while closing behind him, and the sound of the cloaking shield generators hiss and crackle into life before fully energizing to then fall silent once again outside of his ship. He then exited the cockpit and landed his boots on the rusted and unkept metal floor under him. He thought to not go in armed, so he put his weapons on the ground and only went in with his armor on so she couldn't stab him at least. As he headed down the dark and dimly lit hangar, he could see past events had taken place in here. Blood stains on the walls and the floors, energy weapon scorch marks on all of the walls. It seems that there had been multiple skirmishes here with not many winners in past. The floor creaked and ground below his feet with every step taken, and everything in a state of disrepair everywhere you looked, but somehow still serviceable at the same time. As he left the hangar, he entered into a rocky hallway, an excellent place for an ambush, he thought to himself as he continued down the dusty, dirty path to then enter into a massive open space. At the far end, a much larger hallway leading off into what looked like the living quarters, with lights flickering, turning on and off, and others simply not working at all. To his right, there was Natalia standing proud and sexy as always, ready to greet him. On the middle of the space with dagger in hand, touching her chin in a tapping motion, the shiny steel glistening in the dimly lit throne room from the ambient light that filled the space. He approached Natalia cautiously and then stated, "I am unarmed and pose no threat." Natalia still wielding and pointing with dagger in hand, "Good darling, you can't be too safe these days. This in my hand is just trinket and is no concern to a big strong subjugator, is it?" The administrator simply didn't respond in turn. "Oh, come darling, I'm just having a little joke with you. Come sit and let's talk. I'd have someone fetch you a cold beverage, but as you can see it's only you and me here. I promise no one else is here to break up our little party, duh." The administrator then began to talk. He explained what he had just experienced at Backwater City and asked how she was involved with Braca, straight to the point. Natalia then giggled and explained that he's just a client like so many others. "What importance is it to him?" she asked. He went on to explain everything. This was far too big to worry about petty squabbles between factions over anymore. That they both now had a common enemy, and whether she had any involvement in this until now was completely irrelevant, as if she had any part in any of this. To this point she was also being played for a fool as well, and the subjugators at the same time. Natalia then placed her dagger on the table and moved it to the side. Her intrigue began to grow. They entered into much deeper discussion where she had revealed some truths and so did he. The conversation then soon turned dark. Natalia began to divulge information that shook the administrator to the core. The planet with the GLYPHS, the one they had been on the reconnaissance mission for, the shot-up mercenaries and the Van Dual voices over the comms. This was all mind control. We were all just part of a much greater experiment. All of us, even Natalia and her crew. Both parties came to the same conclusion simultaneously. The first to speak was the administrator. He stressed the need to have Natalia tell whatever else she knows. But Natalia in a shock sat there weighing up her options. She then mentioned the story of the lost fleet, the one that disappeared through an unstable wormhole, one they were all told as children that you'd get sent to and stuck in for eternity if you were a bad kid. The administrator then replied with, "That's just a fairy tale to scare us into being good kids." Natalia then responded with a very serious and raised voice, "No. This is very real darling, and I have coordinates to it now." The administrator asked where did she get them from, and she replied with one name and one name only, Braca. The administrator fell back in his seat and with his helmet already off looked her straight in the eyes with a steely look for a moment. "What does this mean?" Natalia responded with that "I'm yet to find out, darling." The two sat for an hour or so more, added each other's details to their Moby glasses and then parted ways. This was going to be something that both factions will need to tenuously ally on for the common good of all of Terran kind. The administrator then left in his ship and actually headed for Earth in the Sol system, as this might now be the only chance he has to ever see it with what is in store for all of them moving forward. While in quantum outside of the HAD sector, he messaged Supernova and filled her in on what she needed know specifically. The rest he kept to himself for now. Several cycles and stops along the way, he finally reached the Terran system and headed straight for Earth. What he saw when he got there were wars across the planet, riots and civil unrest everywhere. This was still a pain point for the UEE's new dominance, and things were still in a clear state of transition. The administrator flew to his home country of what they used to call America, now named Terra Prime. This was the base of operations for the newly formed UEE. There was currently a civil war in progress, but it was kept more to the rural areas and not in the major cities at least. The administrator began his family history research to find who he was and how he had come to be. Soon he realized that he was no part of royalty or of a significant family thought Earth's history. He was just a man who was born into war, a war he or no Terran ever asked for, but a war that has saved the entirety of our species, and that's something to be proud of. He soon then began the long journey back to his real home, Jalan, to share his historical findings and to complete his backstory with everyone at home as well. Act #5. Flash fire, honey, I've got something I want to talk to you about, said Supernova. Flash fire, co-conscious to his future wife's needs as always, attentively asked, "What is it?" Supernova then began to talk with him about what they had endured at the moon base and that they were free, right? Flash fire without hesitation replied with a resounding yes. Supernova then went on with a huge smile in her face with wedding preparations and planning. Flash fire more than happy to attend to her needs and likes, happily discussed everything with her and soon after set a date for their wedding finally. Armin was tinkering, Juna was playing with Tularia, and the day was warm and calm throughout. People working, sitting and talking and everything just being. We had truly created our own paradise here in the Elysium system. Relatively safe from Vanduul, our neighbors have just begun trade with us in the domed cities on Voska, and we began a small relics trade network with them as well, thanks to Armin and his excellent negotiation skills. Our mining and refining centers on Elysium 2, Elysium 5 have begun to help us further our friendships with Voska and the Bainu in Yulin. Our gas giant is a permanent source of both hydrogen and quantum fuels to ensure we have all the required sustainability for our way of life here as well. We are not simply surviving but thriving in our hidden part of space. Both Supernova and Flashfire were also discussing when thinking about having a family after they're married. Many cycles later, the administrator is on the approach to Jalan for final entry. As he enters the atmosphere, he sees his breathtaking home finally coming into sight once again. Finally home, he thought to himself. The bar is stop number 1, he thought as well, for a nice cold beverage and a chat with everyone about his travels, well, the ones to Terra, that is. After landing, he slowly climbed down the ladder to the soft green and lush surface under his feet and took several very deep breaths, then began to cough. The air was so clean compared to where he had been all this time that his lungs weren't used to it again. He thought to himself after his coughing fit how glad he was to be breathing actual air again, and the fight ahead will be more than worth it to save his people first and foremost, but the very existence we have in this universe, flawed though it is, It's our universe and nothing including Braca is going to that away from us, even if it ends in his demise trying to save all of this. This was his sole mission, and that he will need everyone's help, including Natalia and her ragtag crew of imbecilic Muppets and Horsons now as well. This is something that the UEE will utterly ignore, so we need to be the unsung and unlikely heroes in this story. Both us and the pirates. What a time to be alive, the administrator thought to himself as he entered into the hulking doors of the base once again. Later on, that night, after a few too many beverages and stories told about Earth and its lack of anything interesting and its current state of global affairs under the new UEE rule and his family history while keeping up with the Wrangler and Ghost on this rare occasion, he did let his hair down and piss up with the squad. Did the two biggest piss heads of all realize why the administrator knew actually drank until now, well, properly at least. He didn't want to embarrass those two lightweights by comparison in past. Though tonight it was required for him to prepare for what comes next. The next day the planning began with Supernova and a slightly hungover administrator in the office going through planning, tactics and other contingency planning. They needed to start preparing for any eventuation now ahead of time moving forward. We don't have a traditional common enemy, we don't know his whereabouts, nor does Natalia, and we have to somehow parley and ally with Natalia's pirates now and our side, not try to kill them at the same time as well. This is where Supernova comes in, thankfully, right? This is stage #1 preparation. Okay guys, that's it for this part of our story. Next installment coming to a beautiful green grassy utopian world near you, soon. Peace.